All right, welcome. So we're going to do cloud infrastructure review, and I'm going to share the resources that are going to be useful for you. If you go to my blog at jowh.net, click on blog, you can focus on some of the components that you're going to need to put together a security program. These go into depth about what you're going to need to build a successful governance program, right? We're going to categorize, we're going to define our mission, vision, and values, we're going to define our high level objectives, performance targets, risk appetite. We're going to develop indicators. This is why a risk governance, risk, and compliance program is important because without it, you can't get indicators. And we're going to develop a plan to communicate, right? Here's the thing, don't deviate unless you know what you're doing. And even then, don't deviate. Go back to the blog, right? We've got the program layout. Okay, this should be loading. So the program layout is going to walk us through the things that you're going to need between logical controls, policy controls, scheduled security and event audit procedures, team alignment and integration, right? It's going to define how to build your program. You can learn how to set organizational objectives. You're going to learn how to keep it simple. I've got a video here that you can watch, and you're going to learn to write control environment narratives, build your maturity assessments, read my business as business article, and look at your requirements and constraints. And additionally, I've got a resource here about building a better resume. But let's hop back to the Monday.com board and talk about cloud infrastructure review. This process walks us through the cloud infrastructure that an organization might have and how they have it in place. And we're going to start to use Monday.com to do our project management around this. So we're going to open up our planning. Now, we have some phases and stages and steps. Steps are inside of the stages, right? So you can see here, this number highlights how many steps are inside each stage. So phase one has 9 stages with lots of steps in each subcategory, right? Over here, we can see who the owner is. We can define the status. I've put together some custom statuses here that are quick references and use graphic user interface icons to increase a person's understanding of what the status means, right? So what do we want to do first, right? We want to identify the primary CSP. Who is the cloud service provider? Now, all the data you're going to see in here is data that was made up. This isn't actual customers' data, so these are just numbers that are of people, right? This isn't a customer's information. So then we go into stage 2, high-level hierarchy, right? How do we build a high-level hierarchy, right? And how is the organization designed? And how are things split between environment types, right? Production, staging, testing. And when we move to stage 3, right? What runs in the accounts? So we're going to go through all of these questions, right? Stage 4, we're going to understand the network architecture. So we're going to understand how these systems and services work together, and how to access the resources, right? How do we ask the right questions, bring the right teams in, right? And how do we leverage identity access management? So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to our teams and controls, right? The teams that we have working in the organization will range from securely provisioning, and who works in the securely provisioning teams? Risk management, software development, systems architecture, right? So this is a high level role, right, inside of a group. And then we have the description of what they do. Over here, we have the role ID. When we talk about identity access management, right, you need a role ID. And if you use the NICE framework, right, it's got these role IDs built out. So what we can do is we can assign a work role to a team. And this is important because you might do work outside of your primary thing. The technology team might be responsible for cyber defense in some regard. So this technology team conducts assessments and integrations. Well, we've assigned them to be a cyber defense analyst, right? And they use data collected from a variety of sources. We can see what they do. We can drill into this, right? We could assign them to a director objective. We can define what system control that they're going to be responsible for. So we said security, Maybe we want them to be in charge of our logging, right? So they're going to be responsible for previous logon notification. And maybe we want to build our plan for unsuccessful logins and notification of account changes, right? These are some things that we're starting to build out in our information security program. Unsuccessful login, we want them to be accountable for that, right? We want them to also be responsible for least privilege. So we can also have them be responsible for audit logging failures. Now, this is going across the whole range of the cybersecurity framework. So don't inundate your one team with all of these controls, but understand when you should start to support that team with either a different process or expanding or consulting with a third-party agency. So then we're going to get out of this board, and then we're going to set our priority, right? We're going to define the impact. Don't worry about multi-status right now. What systems are they working on? Development, email, production, right? Maybe we have a test lab that they're going to be working on. Great. They're responsible for that test lab. And we can start to share who's on the team, who's on call, what's the email, is there a distro? And then we have the creation log, right? We see when this was made. We can send an alert to the team if this were really important, something we're going on and we need to alert them. And this builds our incident response, right? So we can do our start time and we can send our alert. Now, you won't see it on this screen, but in Slack, a notification has been sent pertaining to a high impact event with development and test lab. And then our status here is we need a phone call, right? So somebody else will be able to see this and say, wow, somebody needs a phone call. Let me give a call. So we've given our technology and R&D team some cyber defense roles, right? We understand what they're going to do. We have identity access management solved for. We understand the scope that they're going to be working on. We're going to be able to set boundaries on the work that they do, track the progress, right? And we can see here, what are those controls that this team is responsible for? Let's dive into them. They're responsible for these. These controls are what they are going to do. And if you wanted to know what unsuccessful login attempts was like, right, we have a description, we have our discussion questions about unsuccessful logins. So this will let you understand what that looks like so more of your shareholders and stakeholders can be active in the conversation. We have related controls here, which we need to assess, right? And we're going to go ahead and select this. We're going to put this as a low priority. It's also selected in our mandatory access control component, right? We could start to write our requirements of the design, who we need an exception for. We're going to put this in discovery. We don't know yet. We're going to ask those questions. Again, this is built off of the NICE framework here. So we're going back to those high level roles, right? We understand how the organization is impacted. So if cyber operations is where the exception is going for, right? Our collect and operate is potentially compromised through the exception. We can manage our exception duration without leaving the screen, and the teams that need to be aware are going to get the information they need to. Does it impact the process? Maybe, right? You can go ahead and select how much it impacts the process. We're just going to put this as low, right? We can build out our responsible teams. This is again focused on identity access management, high level components, who is responsible for doing this work, right? Our technology and our D team is responsible, but who is accountable? The leadership, right? The risk management will be accountable. Our executive cyber leadership is going to be accountable. And maybe we want our team to consult with somebody, right? Here we have the frameworks that are working together. So we have securely provision, overseeing, govern, securely provision, right? Who's going to be consulted in this, right? Maybe we want to make sure legal and advocacy, our training and education, our program and project management are consulted because we're making changes across the organization. And who do we want to inform, right? Same thing, you can come in here, add people to inform, and then we can get into developing our logging, monitoring, and alerting program. Again, we can generate a report and save the duplicity in doing double work. So now we are leveraging our control system to work for us. We can see at a status, we have 25% selected, we have 75% with nothing, and we can see what those are. Least privilege, unsuccessful login. So, and one more item. So what is it that this team has to do? They have 8 more tasks that aren't done, right? But we can leverage machine learning and automation to start to make this more effective. We We have descriptions of the controls, right? So this is an example of what they're doing, right? Prohibit access, right? So we can see at a glance what are the control descriptions based on the control that we've selected. What is the control doing? It's broken down by group. We can dive into it without leaving here so we understand the information flow and enforcement. We can start to, again, share files. We can update the status. We're going to select this. We saw that changed. Go ahead and watch this part of the screen. So we're going to go and we're going to make that failed, right? We see that change to red. You don't want to have to report in multiple places. The more times that people who are doing your audits have to report, the more likelihood of a loss of information. So the more streamlined this system is, the better it's going to perform. But again, this control hasn't failed yet. It's going to be a low priority. It's going to be selected. And the same thing, we can build our entire information flow and enforcement framework, and we can really have an understanding about what is going on there. And then we have our discussion questions pertaining to it, so we can drive into our discussion questions about how does least privilege work, how does unsuccessful login attempts work, right? And you can roll over this and you can start to read it. This works better in the web browser than it does on mobile, but again, we can generate report in the right-hand column. But let's let's continue on this so we can see what's responsible here. We have this remote access. There's a bunch of things going on in remote access. So we could dive into that. We see the related controls. And now this is why information security, people say it's difficult to learn. It's just exceptionally cumbersome and very intertwined. So this framework lets us work more effectively. It uses common language that defines high-level system processes. It is vendor neutral. It is industry agnostic. It defines what is happening in the organization on a logical flow. Same things we can do for these other teams. So our securely provisioned team is starting to get pretty built up with what they're going to be doing. This team member is blocked by something on this date. So we start to get at a high level glance what's going on in our business, what's going on with our security controls, and how the security controls integrate with the rest of the business. So like, follow, comment, let me know more about what you think of this and what you want to see next.